very much, Mr. Max Everett. Just to mention some highlights that are very important for those of us who are looking for information about critical infrastructure. The ICS CERT, the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, with its sectorial CERT, which is something very unique for energy, with the ES-ISAC, the Energy Sector ISAC, with PwC Labs, with so many who are just looking to share the information together with all of us, and I believe it's easy to get it. The next speaker is a very special one, and I hope that I will do it very correctly. Dmitri Kusnezov. He's the Chief Scientist and Senior Advisor to the Secretary, National Nuclear Security Administration, Department of Energy, USA. The fact that we have these kind of people coming, especially to speak with us, means that it is very important and it affects our life. And thank you very much, Dimitri, for coming. It's not his first time.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to come back and talk to you. You know, following Max, who I think framed the problem for us very well at DOE, I wanted to take a step back, think more broadly about some of the technologies we're envisioning as we look further down the road at how to attack some of these problems. I wanted to tell you a few minutes about Department of Energy because the title confuses people even in our own building. You know, we're sometimes called Department of Energy or Department of Everything. Maybe we're better Department of Modeling. We're faced with complex missions and having to invest limited amounts of money to buy down risk against rare events and problems that we own, that we have legal responsibility to report on, that includes critical infrastructure, among other things. You know, in our portfolio, to give a sense of Department of Energy, you know, we have a strategic petroleum reserve for the U.S., you know, 700 million barrels of oil in salt domes along the Gulf Coast. We have a loan program that, you know, gave Elon Musk his $500 million to build his Fremont plant. It's about $30 billion of loan authority and $40 billion more that we can use. We have environmental remediation and the cleanup of a lot of historic nuclear sites. We have a workforce of about 95,000 people. We have 17 national laboratories that tackle a lot of problems for us in our mission space, but also many additional sites. And so we're spread around the world in many ways. Max already mentioned the power marketing authorities with, you know, 10,000 miles of transmission wires, the critical infrastructure piece, the nuclear weapons piece, where we have to report to the president every year on the reliability, the security, the performance of an aging nuclear weapons stockpile. We drive around nuclear weapons around the country, and we have to assess risk as we deliver them and take them apart. We have secure transportation, cybersecurity to protect our sites. Some of our national labs have everything from open networks to the most classified networks, all built upon each other, and we take cyber in its more broader context very seriously. And science, we're the biggest funders of physical sciences in the U.S. And so under this roof, we have this collection of problems, we have a limited amount of money, and we think about how do we meet the obligations of the department, and how do we think of the tools we're going to need to enable critical decisions that have to be made, often billion-dollar decisions, hedging against what we perceive as the most complex risk or worrisome risk that we worry about. Traditionally, we've turned to computing, high-performance computing and simulation, but increasingly now we're thinking more strongly about artificial intelligence, which I certainly picked up in the last 2 days. If you're not mentioning AI or blockchain, you're not part of this meeting. I'm not going to mention blockchain, but I wanted to say a little bit about AI, specifically what it means to us, the kinds of things we're trying to do in terms of our investments, and why I think it's something to pay attention to. You know, just to put it into context, the decisions we make as we simulate very complicated phenomena in order to make decisions on whether there are risks or threats or things to worry about, for example, in the nuclear space, we run big simulations, large multi-physics simulations. There is a question we're trying to answer. We create models, we put them on computers. We have typically the world's fastest computers, very complicated models that use typically the entire size of the machine. But there's a well-defined question. They're mathematical models. We run them through to get the answer, but the answer, the prediction itself, is meaningless unless you have a sense of the uncertainty. How confident are you in anything you predict? And so we have developed over many years kind of a discipline or an art, if you will, of uncertainty quantification, identifying with any prediction we make the quality we think is associated with it. It's non-trivial, but nevertheless, from the model-based high-performance computing world, it starts in that way. We start with a model, we make predictions, and we end up with a cloud of where we think the uncertainty is, and then we make decisions based on that. It's not unlike hurricane tracks. If you follow those in the U.S., they have the benefit of having data coming in to update constantly. So that's one world. Increasingly now, with streaming data, with sensors, with different kinds of signatures that we get in the cyber world, for example, with different things we get from the energy sector, you think about the streaming data, not just today, but a few years from now, how much data we're going to get. The AI world is a little bit different. You start with a lot of data. It has holes in it. It's incomplete. It could be discordant. It's complex. And what you're trying to distill from that is learn from it kind of a subset. What is the learned model? What are the questions you wish you should have asked, but you don't know? In the computing world, we know the question we're trying to answer. We create the models. We push them hard on big computers, and we get an answer with some cloud of confidence. In the AI world, where we're headed is we have this cloud of data, and we're trying to distill from that the effective model that could describe the data. It might not. It might be entirely fictitious. And so when we think about AI, we're thinking increasingly about this data-rich world. It's a place we're starting to work quite a bit in. But what's lacking there is uncertainty quantification. How, you make a prediction with the, you learn, if you will, from the data, some lower dimensional representation of everything there. It surfaces relationships, but you have no context on whether those relationships that are surfaced have any meaning. And there is no methodology right now to say how accurate anything coming out of that is. It's a bit of a black art in many places. It's very dynamic, but it's a place we see a lot of promise. When we think about artificial intelligence, we think of different components. We think of detection as sensors, streaming data, and so forth. We think of learning from the data. That's the software, that's the hardware, the machine learning. Once faced with data from detection, what do you do with it? After that, there's deciding. How do you prove? How do you plan? How do you search? And at the end, there's actions. What do you do? The autonomy piece, the human-AI interface. As we think about AI, it includes all of this. It's not simply the machine learning part. It's the sensors. It's the detectors. It's the assimilation and trying to understand holistically what this technology domain is going to mean for the kinds of problems that we are facing in our statutory responsibilities. Machine learning, one part of AI, a relevant part but not the only part, is kind of the study, construction of systems that learn from the data, but it is very distinct from programming, from data analytics. It's an entirely different kind of application space. When do you use it? When you think that there are patterns that exist in your data, but you don't know what they are. So you kind of a figure of merit then is to try and run basic AI on it. It's a place you would use if you have no mathematical framework. You don't have functional relationships, but you're trying to distill from that some effective relationships. You would apply machine learning there. When you have lots of unstructured data, that's a great domain also to try and learn from the data. Again, it's focused on implementability, but it is a place where it is hard to decide whether you are actually learning anything. You can fit random data, and you can apply machine learning to an entire set of random numbers, and you'll learn something, and it'll tell you something. You know, who knows what it's really telling you, but the fact is you can't simply apply it. And I have to say that it probably has some years to go before it really reaches a place where we're more confident in using it. Today we think about it not just in terms of running it on our traditional computers or on graphic processing units or FPGAs. We recognize that with unique hardware designs, it's not hard to get 1,000 times, 10,000 times speed up over conventional computing approaches. We are exploring different kinds of hardware solutions. There are lots of startup companies today that are developing ASICs, specific chips designed around types of machine learning or sensing or detecting. Things that you could imagine putting in the middle of streaming data and train to detect things that you could update that could continuously learn. Again, as you think about the kinds of information that are going to be coming into very complex networks, you're going to want something that is tuned to the bandwidth of data and the kinds of questions and updates that you want to provide the system. So we're thinking about that at the department. We have a program in hardware and software that we're trying to develop this. I think it's going to be critical to our cyber missions, to the critical infrastructure problems, but more broadly to all the problems that the department faces in the areas that I outlined. And again, our focus is not just on the machine learning piece. It is on the hardware, it's on the software, it's on uncertainty quantification and trying to ascertain whether what you've learned is actionable and with what confidence, especially if you're going to base major decisions on that kind of activity. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a small plug on why we are pushing hard these days into artificial intelligence more broadly, why it ties into the kinds of things that Max outlined, which is you know, our immediate responsibilities and things we worry about today, but how we're trying to position ourselves for where we think the world is going to be in not too many years from now. So thank you again for your time. I hope you found that useful.